All right, we're live.
Okay, so it's nice to meet you all. I'm so glad that I can see you. Sometimes when I do these Google Hangouts, the audience can see me, but I'm actually looking at a ceiling or something. So it's good that I can see your faces. So Dr. Will, yes, we are buds. We talk on Voxer quite a bit about writing and theory and teaching strategies. Before I was a digital learning specialist here at my school, I taught middle and high school for 13 years. So a lot of the examples you're going to see today are drawn from my own classroom and classrooms of the teachers that I'm working with now. So I'm going to screen share some slides with you guys, if that's okay, and talk for just a couple of minutes. And then I have some resources that I'm sharing with you that you can look through later at your convenience when you're ready or interested. And then I'm just going to take some questions, but we only have a few minutes. So that's the plan. Any questions for me, though, before I get started? No? Okay. Quick show of hands, grade levels. Elementary? Anybody from elementary? Awesome. Middle level? Cool. Oh yeah, you guys are the best. Middle level is awesome. And high school? High school level? All right, so, nice, perfect. So right now I work in a 6 through 12 school, but I have 2 children of my own in elementary, so I have my hands in kind of all of those different areas. So hopefully all of you will hear something that speaks to you. All right, so I'm gonna screen share, just give me one moment. All right, can you all see that? Are you still looking at me? Okay, there we go. That's what now you're looking at it, right?
Yep.
Okay, so this is my Ignite talk. An Ignite talk is 5 minutes, 20 slides. Each slide gets 15 seconds. So traditionally when you give an Ignite talk, the slides auto advance and you don't really have a choice, but I'm going to do the advancing myself, but I'll try to hold myself accountable here. So my talk is really about how to eliminate the things you see up there on the screen, but really it's not about going paperless because we are overly concerned about the environment or going paperless because we're die-hard techies. It's really about going paperless and eliminating textbooks and tests because it unlocks the potential of our students. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that method and show you a few examples. So the reason that I started changing the way I taught, because I have been teaching for quite a while, so I definitely taught in a more traditional mindset. It's the way I was trained, it was the way I was told was the right way to teach, was because I was finding that even though I loved my students and I loved what I taught, and I happened to teach some government law and history, my students didn't really love what I was teaching them. And so I cared about my students deeply, and I didn't just want them to learn, I wanted them to want to learn what I was teaching them. So that led to these changes. And it meant that I really had to change the way I was teaching so that they started to care as deeply about the content as I did. So the first thing I wanted to do was change the way I thought about planning. So instead of looking at lessons or projects, I started to think of my learning experiences for my students as maps. And so if you think about it as a map, the learning goal, and that could be a standard or an essential question or something, that's like the destination at the end of the map. And I also would provide my students with supplies to help them reach their destination. So a lot of times those were open educational resources, videos, readings, articles, online simulations, in-classroom activities. And then I let them choose the route to the destination. So instead of prescribing, these are the steps you're going to take along the way, I let them know what their goal was, I let them know that I was there to support them, and I let them know that they had what they needed, and they were able to make some choices. So here's how that works. The first step is that question, it's the destination. Some examples of questions that I ask my students, and these are questions that you really need to inspire them to want to learn, remember. So for me, those were questions like, what is better, revolt or reform, if you want to make change in a society? Or something like, do the differences between the genders really matter? Notice that none of these questions are asking about a specific time period in history or a specific historical individual or person. They're really just asking them to look at larger social constructs or larger views of the world, and then they're going to apply what they learned in my history class to that. Similarly, in, I've heard of in a math class, a teacher said, why is a soccer ball the best shape and structure for the game of soccer? Is there a better option available? And so I've seen the students in this class really dig in and analyze the properties of the soccer ball, the geometry of the soccer ball, and look at other options and talk about why it is truly the best option. So you can imagine how this can be transferred to lots and lots of different subject areas. Okay, so the next thing that they're going to need for their journey on our map is their supplies. So these are open educational resources. This means that they're looking at videos that were created by other teachers or documentary films that were created by experts and scholars, secondary articles, primary source images, photographs. They're analyzing artwork. I'm sure there are tons and tons of free online simulations available from places like Discovery and PBS. And there's things available for all content areas and all levels. We just have to know how to find them and how to curate them. So what I did is I put links to all the resources on my class webpage, and each unit or lesson had its own page on the website. And so students could go there and access the resources, whether they were at home or at school. So they always had access to those supplies no matter how they were making that journey. The great thing about using OER is that the resources were literally from all over the world. So we weren't limited by what was in the classroom. They were given access to videos that were created in England. They were looking at artwork from the African coast. They were looking at examples of primary sources from the Far East. And this isn't just about the resources themselves. It's also about It's also about the people that I can connect my students with. So my students, through their research, started to figure out that they could talk to experts from all over the world. At the top there, you see one of my students reached out and spoke to a museum historian from the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester, in the United Kingdom, because that's where the Industrial Revolution began, long before it started in the United States. So that's who she wanted to talk to. On the bottom right, some of my students who were doing a study on entrepreneurship wanted to talk to the CEO of the company that created their favorite app that they like to use on our classroom iPads. And so they contacted her and she agreed, and we set up a Google Hangout. And she was in Seattle and my students were in our little suburb north of Boston, and they had a great talk for an hour. And then you can see on the bottom left, they realized that there were experts in their midst. And so I had my students interviewing the superintendent of our school system about his plans for the future of the schools. And he really enjoyed listening to their ideas about what was possible for the future of their education. So the learning activity, that suggested route, remember, they had a lot of choice, but the route, I would often give them guidance. Like, you could use this route, or you could, use this activity, but you will have some choice. And as long as you're continuing to communicate with me about what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, we'll all be fine. We'll get to that learning destination together. So I learned a lot about my students once I gave them these choices. These are some photos of my classroom. On the left there, you'll see two girls with their feet up, and you can see they have some pretty serious winter boots, because we have some pretty serious winters up here. A little bit different than your winters, I think. I'm surprised there still isn't snow on them as they put their feet up there. But they really like to kind of kick back and relax and use their devices to communicate and just kind of talk across the desks. You can see the boys on the right there are standing, and there are empty desks there. They could be sitting, but they can't really bear to sit down because they're too busy, talking with one another and working together. And this was happening in the same classroom at the same time. So really allowing the students to create their own little mini learning environment in my classroom and, dictate the level of energy that they need to learn. I found out that if I gave them the freedom to do that and I didn't require them all to be doing the same things at the same time, they were more excited and they learned a lot more. The other thing is, my school, where I worked when I used this model in my classroom, was a BYOD school. So I think you all are one-to-one with Chromebooks, but that meant that students were bringing in whatever it is that they had. So you can see one student here has a iPad with a keyboard, and another has a Samsung tablet. And I had students in the same classroom just working off their smartphones, and some who had no device at all. And so we were using whatever we had in the room, including the collective smarts and the collective access to materials. And we still had books in the room, as you can see on the shelf in the back of that picture. And I just would let them use whatever it is that they felt they needed to use in order to reach that learning goal. And if they choose to use a tool that I wasn't familiar with, I would just say, why do you want to use it? You know, what does that tool do? And then they would teach me why they wanted to use it. We would kind of work through it together. And then by the end of it, not only had they reached our learning goal, but I learned about a new tool that I could, you know, use in my other classes. Of course, students in this model need a ton of feedback, because if they're allowed to make their own choices, sometimes they're going to go off task or off the route a little bit. And so I provided feedback by, first of all, never sitting, always walking around the room, always checking in, being really proactive. But also I brought in a lot of digital formative assessment. So periodically, every couple of days, we would have a quick little check-in quiz using an app like Socrative, or you could use Kahoot, or you could use Clickers, or you could use Google Forms. You could use any of those tools. And then my students would take the quiz, and I would be able to find out whether they were getting the material or they were falling behind. And you can see here, I know immediately the students with the red boxes got those questions wrong. The students with the green got them right. It looks like from this quiz, questions 2 and 3, like I'm going to have to go over those again. But questions 4 and 5, people pretty much know them, so we can probably move on. And it gave me a good feel for where my students were. I was always checking on the documents that they were working on in Google Drive, or in Google Classroom, if you all use Google Classroom, and always commenting, always leaving feedback. And it didn't have to be an essay. Sometimes it was just an outline or a planning document, but constantly giving them feedback, whether I was with them in the classroom or, you know, from my couch at home at night. My students ended up really using the room in ways that I hadn't expected. I actually wrote a grant in order to get the TV screens that you've been seeing. And my students wrote it with me, and it was kind of their idea. They were like, you know, we need more than one screen at the front of the classroom. We need a lot of screens that we can all have access to them. And so I said, all right, let's do this. Let's figure out a way to make this happen for ourselves. And then I let them decide how to set up the room so that they had access not just to technology, but to really traditional things like whiteboards and desks, so that they could set them up the way that they wanted to. So my students started publishing their work. Because as they were producing their projects through this method, they kind of were like, you know, who else is going to see my project, Mrs. Gallagher? You know, who else is going to know what I've learned? And I said, if you want more people than just me to see your project, then let's do that. Let's publish them. And so while some of my students kept their blogs private, the vast majority of them made them public and started sharing them. And I started writing about what my students were doing on my own blog, and other publications started to pick them up. So Larry Cuban, if you know who he is, probably the most famous education researcher in the country, has been doing it for decades, has a history in K-12 classrooms, both as a teacher and an administrator before moving on to Stanford. I have incredible respect for him and his views on technology in the classroom. And on his blog, he wrote a post about a project that he saw my students doing. So these are 9th grade, lower level students, and they made video tourism advertisements for the early 13 colonies, trying to attract Europeans to come and settle their colony in the early 17th century. Pretty incredible stuff. This video is about Georgia, and the students talk about the crops, they talk about the geography, they talk about the different sets of laws, the government structure, and why it was the ideal place for someone to move. So I was pretty honored when he published that. Some of my students put together an ebook of their blackout poetry, and this website called Literacy Love found it, republished it, wrote this whole blog post about how awesome it was, and then sent us a badge and wanted my students to put the badge on their blogs, and they did proudly. And when I sent home the information about all of this with the links and everything to the parents were blown away that their child's project could earn some kind of badge or get some kind of award from a literacy website, even though we were a history class. I've had my students create infographics. They analyze the data. Historical data is one of the most powerful ways to look at history. So we looked at populations, we looked at agriculture, industry, geography. We looked at economics, and I said, take all of that data together, create an infographic about what the United States looks like just before the breakout of the Civil War. And EdSearch picked that up and wrote an article about my students' work and linked to their infographics. And so I have students who have been published in EdSearch. It's pretty awesome, pretty great stuff. This is one of my favorite stories. I had a student who wrote a blog post about the women's movement in the early 19th century, and she really felt like it helped her understand the way she felt as a young woman in the early 21st century. It like put her world in context in a way that she hadn't really known before. And the school where I was working at the time had this senior class fundraiser that was like a Mr. High School beauty pageant kind of thing. And it sparked a debate on Facebook among the students as to whether this fundraiser that was a longstanding tradition in our school was actually doing more damage than good, because it was perpetuating gender stereotypes. Like, they would never have a beauty pageant for our female students. Why is it okay to have one for the male students, tongue in cheek? Isn't that still kind of making fun of women? And it went back and forth and back and forth, and there was a lot of really staunch disagreement, and this student dropped the link to her blog post that she wrote for my class into this debate among her peers, and the debate ended right there. So this, to me, is the most powerful example, because it isn't about this student getting notoriety by some other website. It's about the fact that because she was allowed to choose her path in her learning, the way she learned the history actually applied to her life. And I don't know, I love telling that story. She's a great kid too. She has like blue hair and a mohawk, and she's the best. One of my students co-wrote an article with me about why students should publish their work and why they should have more choice in how they learn. And his name was Evan. As you can see, he's going to be a 12th grader this year, but he was a 10th grader at the time. And he said, when students publish work they're proud of, they're actually recognized for it rather than just getting a grade. And the truth is, for many of our students, grades are the only motivation for what they do. And I just have deep concerns about that, because what will be their motivation when there are no longer grades to provide that kind of structure? And shouldn't they, really be motivated because they want to learn what we're showing them? They want to be there. They want to investigate. They want to share their work. They want to be proud. They want to know that what they're doing matters. And so that's kind of my goal, and that's why going paperless and using all those resources and using creative products was the right move for me. So these are my students from one of my classes. The guy who's kind of the top middle with the white t-shirt and glasses, that's Evan, who wrote that article with me. And I have to tell you, the context to this picture is that we don't have air conditioning in our schools up here in the Northeast. And this was right after my students took their final exam. And so it was late June. They just took their final exam. I have a third floor classroom with windows that don't open all the way because of safety concerns. And so we had fans blowing around really stinky hot air, but they stuck around even though many of them finished their exam and wanted to take a group picture. And that's because of the class culture and the feeling of empowerment that we kind of formed together. And so I was just really proud of these kids that, no matter how hot it was, no matter how done with school they were, they stuck around to be there for each other. So the last thing I wanted to share with you is this link, this bit.ly link, if you want to write it down or take a picture of it really quick, these are links to articles and blog posts and resources that describe some of the examples that I showed you today, and also give you ideas about where to find open education resources, where to find places where you can write grants so that you can get the things that you need for you and your students in the classroom. And I'll make sure I provide that to Will again for you so that you can access it later. So okay, am I back? Can you see me again? Yeah, all right. So I hope that was helpful. Hope it was a little bit inspirational, but I really want to take questions because I know I just threw a lot at you, lots of examples. Any, real concrete how-to questions I'll take, any more like big pedagogy questions I'll take, any experiences that you have and ideas you want to share.
I'll start it.
Sure.
So how scary was it to give students choice versus I have a pacing guide I have to follow and this is what we got to do? What was that like?
So I think it's interesting. I think there's a misconception that if you give students choice, you have to sacrifice pacing and hitting certain like learning benchmarks by a certain time in the year. You really don't have to. All you have to do is communicate those benchmarks to the students. So at the outset of a week, I would say by the end of this week, we have to have finished like up through Gettysburg in the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg. And these are the things I'm going to need you to prove that you understand. I'm going to need you to be able to answer this question, this question, this question. You have to be able to do by the end of the week. Here are the resources. You need to make a plan about how you're going to pace yourself and how you're going to make this happen. And I'm going to be here the whole time. So if you feel like you're falling behind, let me help you catch up. So you don't have to sacrifice pacing for student choice. You just have to be really transparent with the kids about what the time limits are, what the benchmarks are, so that when they're given student choice, they're making realistic plans and they're not biting off more than they can chew.
I think my other question is, did you have issues with some students who they really couldn't self-regulate and you had to sort of really be on top of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think in every classroom you're going to have a mix of motivations and abilities to self-regulate. You're going to have those students who can really handle it, and then you're going to have kids who are like just eager to be given the choice so that they can take off and fly, right? There's always a few in the room that can do that, no matter what level. I mean, I talked about how I taught lower level students, I taught honors level students. This method works with all levels. Trust me, I've tried it. But there are kids, even in honors classes, who can't self-regulate, right? Maybe they're in an honors class because intellectually they're there, but they're not, they don't have the honors level self-structuring or self-regulation, but that's okay because the kids who are able to take off and fly, I only have to check in with them here and there, and I know they're okay, right? The kids who need me more, this way I can be with them more in person because I can use that class time to check in with them, and if they get behind or get distracted, I can say, hey, like, looks like you're distracted right now. This is your goal. This is your time limit. How are you going to get there? Now that you've lost this time, you're going to have to revamp your plan. Do you want me to help you do that? Like, do you want me to sit with you for a little while? And I found that building that relationship over time really helped. Also, if there's a student who consistently uses the time to kind of goof off and stuff, what I would do is I just wouldn't accept the work if it wasn't done well. And I mean, that doesn't mean that they got a 0. There are no zeros given. They had to just keep doing it over and fixing it over and over and over. And I would spend time after school. I would come before school. I would call their parents. I was just relentless. And it only took a month or so of the school year for them to figure out that they weren't going to be able to get anything by me. And so that goofing off kind of stopped because they're like, my mom knows everything about what's happening in this class. And I'm like, I know. Maybe if I don't have to call her, she wouldn't have to know everything. And he was like, oh, okay. So it takes a little bit of persistence and time investment at the outset to get them to understand that student choice is an opportunity to learn more, not an opportunity to goof off. But you can do it if you're willing to invest it at the beginning.
Come on, teachers. One more question before Santora takes us home.
I deal with the resource students who are sometimes maybe 2 or 3 grade levels behind where they should be. How do you help them?
Is it an inclusion environment where they're mixed in with other students, or are you talking about a room that's on its own?
Both.
Both, yeah. So when they're in the room that's on its own, do they get opportunities to get like extra help from you, or in addition to their time in class?
Yes.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I'm sorry. The challenge sometimes is that they don't want to get started at all. They don't want to even attempt it, a project or something like that. And so just even getting them started is a challenge.
Yeah. So I think that the key to that is to figure out, remember, it's that I don't just want them to learn or produce it. I want them to want to produce it. So why won't they get started? Is it because they've been burned before when it's been too hard? Or is it because they haven't really been given the choice before? So the best way, I think, to get them to be willing to give it a shot is to say, like, no, like, you're going to get to decide what to do here. This is your chance to show everybody what you can do. This is not me trying to catch you doing something wrong. This is me saying, if what you love to do is make music, then why can't your final project be in the form of a song? If what you love to do when you go home is draw draw anime or draw cartoons, like why can't your final project be in the form of a graphic novel? Like why can't it be whatever it is that you need it to be in order for you to express that you've learned? I don't care how you show me how you've learned. I just care that you've learned, and I care that you found success doing it. So I think a lot of times the reason kids don't even want to get started is because when they see the task, it feels insurmountable. But if you're letting them know that they're going to be able to leverage their strengths as much as they're going to struggle, and that you're going to be there all along to help them, then I think that's how you can like turn the switch on that motivation. At least that's what's worked for me.
I really like what she said about sometimes because they've never been given opportunity or choice on how they're going to complete a project. And I think our students are so accustomed to, hold my hand, take me here, take me there. But I think as an educator, talking about giving student choice, that's scary. That's very scary. But at the same time, I'm starting to see what you're talking about, though, about sometimes the prior experience, they've never been given choice.
So, and what happens, especially to overachiever students, when they're given this choice, overachiever students are really good at following directions and getting everything right? They're really good at that prescripted model. So we tend to be like, oh, they're okay. So just a warning, if you start giving this kind of choice to your overachiever students, they might be the ones who give you the most pushback, because they don't want to come up with something to make. They want to know how to do it, when you want it. They want to know when they turn it in, it's 100% right. And if they're going to be making the choices along the way, they're not going to be sure whether it's 100% right. They're not going to be sure whether that's the best choice. And so when I taught my honors classes and taught this way, overwhelmingly for the first few weeks of school, it was, would you please just tell us what to do, right? Can I just write a paper? And I'm like, nope, you can't. We'll have plenty of writing later. This isn't a paper project. You have to come up with something else. Would you just give us a test? No, I don't give tests. So, and they hated it. But then over the course of the year, they realized that I was giving them so much more freedom, and that they were building up this whole other set of skills that they hadn't built up before. The stuff that by the end of the year, the stuff that they come up with, it's really incredible. So.
All right, any more questions or feedback? Any questions or feedback? Good. Okay. Well, again, thank you, Kerry, for this awesome experience. And again, this is our first time doing a teacher-led conference, and as well as having someone do a keynote for us. So we appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I think I sent you my slide deck already, didn't I?
Yes.
Okay, great. So please feel free to share that with everybody, because that's a link, and that link goes to a Word doc that's like 2 pages of articles and resources to give you lots more examples of how this looks in action, so that you can figure out, how to adopt it and what would work for you to give it a shot for the first time in your class.
Awesome. Well, now we're going to hand it over to Ms. Santora, but I'll hit you up on Voxer.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye. It was nice to meet you all. Enjoy the rest of your week.